Earlier this month, Governor Mikie Sherrill signed the John R. Lewis Voter Empowerment Act, legislation designed to protect the right to vote and ensure that minority groups have full access to the electoral process. New Jersey is now the 11th state to pass its own Voting Rights Act. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court recently scaled back race as a consideration in redistricting nationally. Now, Nuzat Chowdhury is the director of the Democracy and Justice Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. She joins us now to talk about it as part of our Under the Dome series. Nuzat, it's great to have you on the show. I want to talk about the bill that Governor Sherrill recently signed, the John Lewis Empowerment Act. What does this law do as it relates to voting here in New Jersey?
Yeah, really excited to have the governor sign the John R. Lewis Voter Empowerment Act. This law is a state law which puts into state law a lot of the protections that voters used to get under the Federal Voting Rights Act. So the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 is the federal law that came at the end of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And since its passage, it had protected voters, and particularly voters of color, along a couple of different lines. It gave voters legal tools to challenge, racially discriminatory maps. It gave voters legal tools to make sure that they could challenge if they were being intimidated at the polls. It made sure that discriminatory policies stopped before they were actually passed, and it gave expanded language access, protections, and assistance. Unfortunately, what we've seen since 2013 is that there have been multiple Supreme Court decisions which have significantly weakened the protections of the federal VRA. And so, what the John R. Lewis Voter Empowerment Act of New Jersey, or the New Jersey State Voting Rights Act, does is make sure to fill in all of those places in which the federal VRA just no longer protects us in the same way anymore. So,
Can I jump in
because
right there?
Mhm,
Because there's
absolutely.
not everyone understands the difference between federal law and state law when it comes to overseeing elections and how they're implemented. So where is federal law superseding state law that a bill like this would be necessary?
Absolutely. In general, federal law covers a different area than state law does. Where federal law and state law conflict, federal law really trumps state law, for lack of a better term. In terms of voting rights, the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 protected every voter of color, across the entire country. And so, where that federal law is weakened now, where it no longer protects us, states can now pass laws to come in and protect voters in that state from some of those things that no longer are protected under the federal VRA. So, for example, in the New Jersey Voting Rights Act, there is a provision called the preclearance program that stops counties, if counties and other localities were to pass a voting policy that resulted in discrimination against Black or Brown or other voters. Under the federal law, that preclearance program no longer exists. In New Jersey, that will now exist with the New Jersey Voting Rights Act. So even though the federal law is no longer doing that work in this area, the state law will protect voters of color from the impacts of any policy that might discriminate against their communities.
This law was signed right around the same time that the US Supreme Court issued a few key decisions, and I want to talk about them. One has to do with gerrymandering, in this case in Louisiana, where the court said that race should not be considered when it comes to drawing district maps. This is a process that we can sometimes refer to as gerrymandering, depending on how those maps are drawn. What is your reaction to the US Supreme Court eliminating race as a consideration?
Unfortunately, this really goes along with a pattern that we have seen from the Supreme Court since 2013, really a concerted effort to weaken the protections of the VRA. I think the case is honestly disastrous. The Justice Kagan, in her dissent, says that the majority decision effectively eviscerates one of the strongest legal tools that the federal VRA had given to protect communities, and especially communities of color, from maps that diluted their votes that were racially discriminatory. Um, the federal VRA, it was passed specifically to make sure that we were delivering on the promises of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which protect voters of color from racial discrimination and make sure that their powers, that their voice is not diluted. And essentially, what the Supreme Court said in Calais goes against what the 14th and 15th Amendments really intend to do, and just make it much more difficult for voters to prove that a map really is racially discriminatory and is diluting their voting power in their communities.
The U.S. Supreme Court did uphold the right to count mail-in ballots that were mailed on Election Day. This is a case in Mississippi. Your reaction there?
We were pleasantly surprised by this particular decision and in full support. Mail-in voting is one of the ways by which voting is made much more accessible to all communities. It is safe, it is very popular, widely used, and of course here in New Jersey, it is something that has been expanded since 2020 and the pandemic, and it makes it much easier for voters to get in their ballots if they are not able to visit a drop box or to go in for whatever reason during early voting or on election day. So we celebrate this particular decision. We think it is good for democracy.
There is a lawsuit right now facing New Jersey. The GOP is suing the state. Federal law, just for a little context, does allow that some U.S. citizens living overseas can vote. But New Jersey law goes a little further than that and allows U.S. citizens born abroad to vote if their parent or legal guardian or spouse was eligible to vote in New Jersey in the prior election. The GOP is suing there. Your thoughts on whether New Jersey's law goes too far and if the GOP has a case here?
So because this is a case that the state is currently defending, I can't opine as to the constitutionality of it. I think what is really important to remember here is that the federal law allows states to administer their own elections. So the federal law in this particular case really is meant to make sure that members of the military and U.S. citizens overseas are allowed to vote. And the New Jersey state law reflects that and really is about making sure that citizens who are eligible to vote otherwise are able to vote. And I think it's important to keep in mind who the New Jersey law is impacting. It tends to be, as I mentioned, uh, uh, military members, other U.S. citizens overseas, and children of members of the military. In New Jersey,
I have to jump in here because we are out of time.
please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I appreciate
No
you
worries.
taking the time to talk to us today. Nuzat Chowdhury, Director of Democracy and Justice Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Thank you.
Thank you.